All right, hello everyone. My name is Brendan McLaughlin. I'm the founder of HTS Hero. And today, my promise to you is that you'll learn how to classify in less time using AI without cutting corners. And a quick disclaimer just to get it out of the way. This presentation is for educational purposes only and is not advice of any kind. Customs business should always be completed and finalized by an authorized customs broker or by the importer themselves. So without further ado, let's get going. So about a month ago, I put up a post on LinkedIn, and this was it. It just said, are those Taylor Swift's tour dates or HTS revisions? And if you're in trade, you'll know what this means. You might even get a laugh out of it. But fundamentally, I had seen and noticed that there was 24 revisions or changes to the HTS this year alone. And seeing it presented in this way made me think it looked like tour dates. Now, this resonated with way more people than I would have thought of. This post got something like 8,000 impressions, 150 likes, and a bunch of reposts. And certainly part of it was for the humor element. If you don't get the joke, just bear with me here. But more of it was the fact that 24 changes to the HTS is just a very, very complicated thing that means a lot of changes are happening. It's very hard to keep up with. And so this sort of reveals an underlying truth that you may or may not agree with, but part of me thinks you're here today because you believe this, and that is that trade is more complicated than ever. I hear of and speak to more people who are working harder than they ever have in their lives who are in trade, and this is just ringing true. And so one aspect of trade, one very small aspect of trade, but a mighty one nonetheless, is this idea, this task of classification. Right, and classification takes time, and it can be tricky to get right. There's a lot of little details involved with it, and I'll just show you a handful of those details here. This isn't all of them, but if you're trying to do a classification, you have to do all of these things like find headings, apply the GRIs, know the intended use of the product, and reference things like explanatory notes, cross rulings, etc. And so all of this is just to say that classification is complex. There's a lot to do, there's a lot to think about, there's a lot of sort of moving pieces. And fundamentally, complex things are slow and difficult. Right, and so if classification wasn't complex, then it would be quick and easy, but it's not. Simple things are quick and easy. Classification is currently not. But if we wanted classification to be quick and easy, we would need to simplify it. We would need to simplify it. And so this sort of begs the question, how do we make something simple, right? If we're going to try to find out how we could make classification a little bit more simple, how do we make anything more simple? And so one way to explore this is just by getting to the bottom of what simple means. And we can do that by understanding sort of what the opposite of simple is, by understanding what it means for something to be complex. So one definition of complex could be when many things are connected in a non-obvious way. And what does that look like? Well, something like this. So there's a lot of things and the connections between them aren't really clear, and this makes it hard to understand or complex. And so the opposite of this would be when very few things are connected in an obvious way. And that would look like this. Two things, straight line between them, seems like it'd be pretty easy to understand. And so it's all about the number of things and how easy or how obvious the connections are between them. And this leads us to this pretty simple equation of how to simplify something. It would be limit the number of things and then make the connections between them very obvious. And I've got a massive disclaimer on this, or asterisk, if you will, which is without removing essential details or cutting corners. It's very possible to simplify something by just getting rid of half the stuff that matters, but usually when you do that, the end product is just not what you want. So here we go. We've got our definition. We've got our equation of how to simplify something. And this can allow us to take things that are complicated like this and transform them, in some cases, into something that looks like this. So can we apply this to classification? right? That's the golden question. Can we make classification simpler, or how do we make classification simpler? So let's try it. Let's try to see if we can limit the number of things. So if this was our original list that we were using to say, hey, these are the things that make up a classification, what if, hypothetically, you could boil it down to just this, right? 5 things instead of all of these. Okay, hypothetically, work with me here. So this is limiting the number of things and then making the connections between them obvious. And how will we do this? Well, we break it into steps, so give it an order, and then make each step really easy to complete. So here's that limited list that we were just looking at. And what we would do is give it an order. So maybe the first thing is get the article description. Maybe the second thing is go and check cross rulings that sound similar to this article description, and so on. And then for each of those steps, you would make them as easy as possible to complete. So maybe for article description, that means just asking a series of questions. Is this article many parts or one? What are the dimensions? What's the weight? And then for a step like finding headings, we would just have a checklist you'd follow, which would be make sure you apply the GRIs, make sure you consider intended use, and make sure you look at explanatory notes, which are just definitions of things as they can be understood in the harmonized system. And there you go. That would be what you'd have to do for finding headings. And then our final bit, our disclaimer that we had, was without cutting corners. And I believe we've done this. I believe we've done this because if we look at the list that we've got here, we kept all of the things that seem to be relevant, like the GRIs and all of that. What we've removed is things like financial incentives, which maybe you just shouldn't be considering when you're classifying. Tariff rates as well. Those are downstream from a classification. But everything else is pretty much checked off. And the 2 things that are left with question marks, we will dig into later and see how those are actually going to be considered as well. And so what have we done? What have we done here with classification? Well, we've taken something a process that looked like this, where someone says, what's the HTS code for cabinets? And then we get our 10-digit code by following some complicated thing. And we boiled it down to something like this, a simple, repeatable process. And that's great. But you might be thinking, all right, well, it doesn't really seem like it doesn't seem like we've limited anything. It seems like we've still got to do all of the things, right, Brendan? So like this list is, all the doing still got to get done. We didn't really limit, did we? Well, let's dig into that now. Let's see how we might be able to limit those still necessary things that we've already simplified. And so let's go back to the promise that I gave you in the beginning. Right, how can we classify in less time with AI without cutting corners? And now that we have this idea of what it means to simplify something so it takes less time, we can now ask the question, how can AI simplify classification without cutting corners? And the answer to that is a process called coordinated handoff. Right? Think of handoff as a relay race. And coordinated handoff is just the process of saying, hey, for any given task, define who should do what based on their given strengths. And then when anyone completes a task, make the handoff between them seamless. This really is just process improvement 101 that's existed for some time, but applying it to the world of AI and how AI and humans can combine to get tasks done very quickly and very effectively. And so it looks something like this, right? Maybe there's some task and AI starts off by doing something in order to get that task done. And it takes the result of its work and it hands it off to the human. And then maybe the human goes and it does some work, it gets something done, and then it hands off the result of its work to the AI. And you would just repeat this process over and over, sometimes with one of them doing many steps at once and then handing off work, but you would repeat this process until the task is done. But the question is, okay, if I want to implement coordinated handoff, who does what? How do we decide who does what task? And we can answer this by asking, again, another really simple question, which is, can AI do this without cutting any corners? And here's our nifty chart that tells us what the answer is for that. And so if the AI can do the task without cutting corners, AI does it. If it can't, you do it. If it's a little bit in the gray area where you think the AI could probably get this right 50, 60, 70% of the time, but I don't maybe fully trust it, well, then the answer is have the AI, or try to have the AI do it, and then add a review step where the human actually goes and says, okay, good job, or no, maybe not quite, just like you would do with an intern or sort of a novice working with a professional. Right, and you might find along the way, if you're ever implementing coordinated handoff for yourself, that things that you think are maybes end up being more complicated than you think, or don't have as good of results as you think, and you revert back to no. So that could happen in some occasions. So now here's our sort of framework for knowing who does what in coordinated handoff. But there's a couple of really big considerations that will sort of give you some clarity on how to implement this properly. The first is data availability. So this probably is the most important one. If you don't have good data, or rather, maybe not the most important one, but it's a big limiter. And that is if you don't have the right data in order to get the task done, and the human would have to go and get data from other places and it wasn't always reliable, then that's probably a task that the human would have to do. Because the AI can only work with the data that it's given, and it can't really reach out and figure things out on its own to a degree. And so probably a task most suited for a human. The next consideration is task complexity. So if you have a very complicated task and there's just a lot to it, you might want to just by default say, okay, let's have the human do it. One thing I will say is, though, there's some opportunities here where sometimes when you have a very complicated task, it's just a series of simpler tasks chained together, and that's what makes it complicated. And sometimes there will be opportunities to identify that a task is just a series of smaller tasks, and sometimes the AI can get some of those simpler tasks completed. And the next two I actually think are the most important, especially in industries like trade or finance or legal, and that is regulations and trust. So what do I mean by regulations? So the reason why you want to consider regulations, other than the obvious, is for example, something like reasonable care. In trade, we've got this concept of reasonable care. So for any given import, you need to basically show that you've done due diligence in all of your answering of the questions and your homework to make sure that the import and all the details are complete and true. And so one thing we see a lot lately is systems popping up that will automatically classify products. And the jury's still out as to whether or not, from a legal perspective, those express reasonable care. But fundamentally, my perspective that I took on this quite some time ago was that, well, these AIs, they can't really reason. They don't have reasoning capabilities, even though they can really seem like they do, and they can fake it extraordinarily well. It's just not the case, from my opinion, that this is true yet. And so something as simple as CBP coming and knocking on your door and saying, hey, why'd you classify this way? If the question eventually just goes back to a robot, how is the robot going to justify itself in some way? Now, I think in reality, you'd say, well, the organization or the brokerage would come up with a way to walk through this and rationalize it. But at its essence, for me, it was clear that AI currently cannot reason, and it wasn't true to say that you've taken the right amount of care or due diligence in classifying something when it just got done automatically and no one knew what the reasons were for all the different selections, right? So regulations, big considerations. And this doesn't mean AI has no role in trade or legal or finance. It just means you have to be careful. There's a sort of elegance around doing it properly. And then finally, trust. So the last consideration is, one of the things we see a lot today as well is AI content. So tweets and blogs and all these things being written by AI. And when it's done very well, sometimes you won't notice and it sounds just like the person who posted it. But sometimes you can really tell that it was AI and it just sounds very like generic. And this has lost trust with people, right? When people can tell that something was completed with AI, they sort of check out because it doesn't feel like there's a real connection there anymore. And you start to question, who am I following? These kinds of things. And so just considerations when you think about who should do what task, think about data availability, how complex the task is, whether or not there's regulations that would make it just seem strange for an AI to do it. And then the same thing with trust. Is trust going to be somewhat broken if AI were to be doing this task? So I know I spent some time on that, but that's quite important. And with that out of the way, we can now get into the actual example of implementing coordinated handoff with classification. And that looks something like this. So first 3 steps, let's just say, of any given classification would be article description and, let's say, getting headings. You'd start off with a human doing the article description. This would be going to the customer, talking to them, and really understanding what the article was, what the product was. This could be getting images from them to further understand it yourself. This could be getting a bill of materials, maybe notices from suppliers or manufacturers around what processes they use to manufacture the article, all these kinds of things. Once you've got this full picture of the article, then you can jump into finding the headings. And this is where you'll take all these details, hand them over to the AI, and the AI will go and find the 4 or so most likely headings to fit the article. And the reason you would have AI do this is because there's something like 1,200 or so 4-digit headings in the HTS, or the HS itself as well. And to go through those as a human would take quite some time. And also, even if you didn't go one by one, which no one would because there's chapters and sections, it still takes time, and there's all these blind spots that you might have based on previous things you've classified or chapters that you think make sense that jump to mind. It's kind of easy to cut corners yourself in this way. And so what you would do is say, okay, AI is great at this kind of task. It can do this in 3 seconds. So you let AI go and find the most likely headings. It takes a couple of seconds, but this task here of finding headings, this sort of falls into that category of maybe, for me anyways, where AI goes and does it, but you want there to be a review. You want there to be a review. So it'll go and do it, it gives you the headings, and you go and say, okay, either these look good, or maybe you missed the mark a little bit, and then I'm gonna go and find them manually myself now. But in most scenarios, we find that AI can do a really, really good job at this, and it's just up to the human to kind of select between the ones that they did find, pick the best one, make sure they've applied the GRIs properly and considered everything, and then maybe add some notes and move on. And so this is a quick example of just handing off the baton and doing coordinated handoff for the first couple steps of a classification. And here's where things really get interesting, is the time it takes for the AI to find headings, right? We talked about this a little bit, but maybe it's 3 to 5 seconds. For a human, maybe it's 15 minutes, right? Think about the time savings there. And then if you combine this with another task in classification, which is generating a report of the classification once it's complete, again, this might take an AI 3 to 5 seconds. It might take a human up to 15 minutes. And if you chain all of these tasks together into all of the things it takes to classify, we can really clearly see that classification with coordinated handoff can take about 10 minutes, whereas a manual classification might take up to an hour. Right? And I think the only reason that this is compelling is because of this. The quality remains the same. Right? When the quality of the classifications is exactly the same, but it takes much, much less time to do, right? We haven't cut corners, and the task is now much quicker, then that's a win. If you lost quality along the way, then probably not something you want to do. But because we retain the quality, it's a big win. And what we're seeing, I've taken this graphic from our website, is for classifiers who are using our system, they'll sort of report. In the past, they've got 15 minutes to do finding headings, 10 minutes to fetch notes and rulings and sort of do that, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these tasks manually take about an hour, whereas with HTS Hero, they're automated. Right, but let's look into why this works and wrap everything together. Why does coordinated handoff work? Why does it keep the quality while also reducing the time it takes to classify? Well, it simplifies. And if we go back to the beginning of the presentation where we talked about simplifying things, we can just again apply our framework and see if coordinated handoff adheres to that framework. So does coordinated handoff limit the number of things? In this case, the answer is abundantly yes, but kind of in a funny way, right? It's not that we've really gotten rid of anything because of how important each step of classification is. What we've done is hand off some of the work to AI. And even if we need to review some of that work, right? It's often still much quicker anyways, and again, we retain that level of quality. One of the other funny things that you'll find is when you implement coordinated handoff, it helps you discover what might not be needed. So in this process of breaking out the task and seeing who should do what, it does give you that chance to see if everything is actually necessary. Right, and so if we just go back to our list here, I told you that we'd maybe fill in some of these question marks about the human bias and the best being subjective, meaning what is the best classification? That could be subjective depending on the person. All right, we've actually even helped improve these. Right, with coordinated handoff, because we've introduced this AI to the picture, the human bias and the best being subjective, those are both kind of considered now because there's another perspective coming in the form of the AI, giving its own thoughts, its own analysis. Right, pretty cool. Okay, so we've limited the number of things, or at least the things that the human has to do. How have we made the connections obvious? Well, if you do coordinated handoff well, you usually embed it in some application like a website or a mobile app. And when you do that well, you're only ever shown relevant information when you need to see it, right? And in that process, like we said earlier, we've broken it down into an order, and then you will make each step very easy to follow, which is basically here indicating when it's your turn to do something. You see it in the app, you do it, and you only see or need to care about the information that's shown on the screen to make a good decision or complete the next step. And so I think it's time to see all of this in action. We will see what coordinated handoff looks like in HTS Hero for classification. So this is a quick video. I'll just sort of add some commentary on top of this as it goes, just to make things clear. So we begin with entering a description for a product. So imagine that first step of getting all the details was completed, and the conclusion is that we're looking to classify a carbon fiber bicycle frame for racing bikes. So intended use is racing, and the article itself is a bicycle frame. Could be more details here about the dimensions and all that, but for example's sake, I think this works. So off we go, we enter the description, and then we click go, which is us handing that off to the AI. And you can see right away, we start looking for candidates, or rather the AI starts looking for candidates based on these details. And after a couple of seconds, we get a list. So it spits a list back out to us of the ones that it thinks make sense. And we can already see how much time this might have saved us. Very quickly we get some. Now, question is, are these high quality? Or do any of these make sense? Are any of these the best one? And that's when here we have a chance as a human to apply GRI, intended use, all of that. And meanwhile, in the background, you'll see the system will still be trying to analyze all the candidates that it found and try to give extra context just in case that helps you, the classifier, make a decision, but it's all up to you. And so of the options that are here, it looks like the bottom one might make the most sense, so we click on that. And then that's us handing the baton back over to the AI and saying, okay, this is the right one. Now, can you give me anything else? Can you provide some context on the next level of the HTS now that we've selected the heading? And from this point forward, you'll see in the video that the classifier just goes and clicks and clicks and clicks because they believe they know what the best option is, completely independent of the AI giving analysis. So it completely ignores that, which you have the right to do. And we just go all the way to the final 10 digits. So click frames and forks, yes, bicycle frames. And let's say you know they're over $600 each. Boom. You get done, here's your final classification, and maybe the cherry on top, use AI or otherwise just to get a tariff value. So 60% roughly from China. So this is coordinated this is coordinated handoff in action. And so let's go back to the promise. I said I was going to help you figure out or see how you could classify in less time using AI without cutting corners. And the short answer to this, now that we know what we know about simplifying things in coordinated handoff, the simple answer is implement coordinated handoff. And the reason coordinated handoff works, just in summary, is that it offloads tasks. Of the tasks that it offloads, it drastically speeds them up. And then it can do all of this while remaining compliant, which is so, so, so important, right? In an industry where changes are happening rapid, right? 24 this year alone. You need a way to keep up. You need a way to sort of keep up with all of this change and the fast-moving nature of trade. And a process like coordinated handoff that simplifies things and helps you move quicker is going to really be useful. And on that line, I really hope that today was useful. I hope you learned something. If you want to classify quicker, please feel free to reach out to htshero.com. And if you want to talk with me or learn more about any of this, feel free to reach out to me, Brendan at htshero.com, or I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well at Brendan McLaughlin. That's all. Hope that was useful, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.